All right, all right. Welcome back to another episode of the Behind the Back podcast. We are your hosts. I am Marcos Conan Negron, and beside me here, as always, is Ben, the Jet Reds. Ben, our Kings finally got in the win column. You got a bye week this week. The Eagles are winners. We're all winners here. How you feeling?
To be honest with you, I'm on like the highest of highs right now because Sunday, Niners won. Monday, Kings won. Tuesday, Kings won. It's just 3 days of victories, bro. I'm cooking right now.
Yes, sir. I know it feels good. So we'll start. We're obviously going to break down all of our teams today, including a fair Chargers check-in this week. Sorry, Chargers, we had to breeze by you last week. Finished by our betting picks of the week, but we'll start with Kings. So, dude, as y'all may notice down below, we have a Beam Team win tracker going on. So we set the goal for 50 wins this year. So we're just going to mark every win that they got right on here. So you see that we have two. We played a back-to-back and we won the first back-to-back that we've had this year. And the first four games the Kings played, we obviously talked a little bit after the Minnesota game, but they played the Lakers on Saturday and then they had these two the past 2 days. So it kind of felt like, and I know we kind of wanted to talk about it a lot more, it felt like the first two games were one version of the Sac Kings, and then these last two games were kind of they're starting to figure things out version of the Kings. So let's break it down. What did you think, if we want to start with like the first two games? What were some of the things that like stood out to you in the first two games that made it seem like, okay, maybe they still need to figure some things out?
Well, I think we saw a lot of the same struggles that the Kings had last year in the first two games of this year, and also games 3 and 4 too, right? But 3 and 4 was kind of a different story, and we'll get into that. But games 1 and 2, you saw the wide open 3-point shots not going in for the Kings, and on the other side, letting 3-point shots go in. And we saw that throughout the preseason. We definitely saw it in games 1 and 2. Another frustrating part of it all was the Kings seemed like the better team against both the Timberwolves and the Lakers.
Yeah.
And what it ultimately came down to was the same thing as last year again. And it was simply not being able to stop a run when you need to get points on the board. You let the Timberwolves go on a big run that they were able to cut the gap and then ultimately take control of the lead and not really take control of the game and not really look back. And then same deal with the Lakers. It's like you kind of got them to a point, both of them, to a point where they're down at least 10, which 10 isn't a lot in the NBA, right? But 10 points, you're in control of some kind. And at that point, you can kind of establish your rhythm for the game. And I don't know what it is about that 10 points for the Sacramento Kings these last 2 years, but it seems like it's essentially a layup for the other team just to get back in a game against them. And so it was frustrating for sure. And I think that was some of the pain points in the first ones that I saw.
Yeah, I think it was a mixture. Agreed. Like we just got stagnant at the worst times, and it felt like all the things that we did in those games to give ourselves the lead, or to all the good stuff, we did as much bad stuff to make up for it. And I felt like in the Lakers game, it was a little frustrating because it was one of those games where Braun was hitting every three he took, and it was one of those games where it's like, okay, when he's hitting like that, and you're still trying to contest him, and it's just like it's annoying when he has those kind of games. So it was frustrating.
He had 16 of their 21 straight points against us opening up. Like that's crazy. And that's coming off of a beautiful end of the third quarter that the Kings had, where I mean, some things kind of didn't go their way, but then Foxy pulls up from three back-to-back possessions, and on the last one at the buzzer to send them in with a 7-point lead going into the fourth. And we have all the momentum at that point. And it was like, okay, Kings are cooking. And then Braun and the Lakers come out in the fourth and just dominate. And they really didn't look back from there. Like, I know it was a close game, right? But you never felt like the Kings had much of a chance because they had dug themselves into another like 12, 14-point hole in the fourth. So it was tough.
Yeah, and in Minnesota, it felt different because it was really just one run that Minnesota had that really put them away. The Kings were really in control the first game, but the second game, it was much more push and pull. Obviously, Anthony Davis ends his losing streak against Domantas, and obviously that was a huge talking point. But
what a battle of the bigs.
Yeah, then both yeah, AD stepped up. It was a really good game. For the Lakers, their stars showed out, and I think it was
Mm-hmm.
important for them. That's how they're going to need to win these games this year, is their guys stepping up. And I felt like that was one of the games defensively we were trying to figure out how to match up against them. I felt like at times we were playing a little too small for what, some of the matchups were. Like Demar was on them a few too many times. I was like, okay, maybe we gotta switch up how we're approaching them here. But again, this was and Keon didn't play that game too, and we were or mainly me at that point was overreacting to the fact that he wasn't playing. But I know it's the beginning of the season, and you're trying to figure out rotations. Um, but it felt like in that game in particular, we could have used a little bit more of that defensive fire from Keon there.
Yeah, to be honest with you, I don't agree at all with Mike's decision to sit Keon in that game. I think of all the players that you're consistently rotating throughout your Kings team right now through the first 4 games, to sit that guy when you needed defense in that game, that just it really was mind-boggling to me.
Yeah. So, and there was good things that came from it too, right? So we let's talk about like a few topics now. I think when it comes to the games that went right, right? Even throughout the first 4 games, I think there's a couple dudes who have really stepped up. I mean, the whole team is now looking a lot better, but I think it's good that some of these pieces that we actually needed to make this team a little bit more complete are working. And I got to start with Kevin Huerter. I got to, you know, I've been one of the first on the bandwagon of, all right, let's get him the heck out of here. First trade piece possible. Like Keon will start over him, and I'm going to feel really good about it. But Kevin has, started since game one and has gotten progressively better each and every game, and he's looking like Kevon Herter and Red Velvet. He's back in the game. Like
Mm-hmm.
I've really liked what I've seen from him, and it's not just offensively; it's defensively. He's getting, he's specializing in deflections now. He's just finding ways to get inside the gap. I really liked what I saw from Kevin, and we I guess we haven't seen this version of Kevin since 22, and it really does expand the potential of the starting unit when Kevin is there and he's cooking.
Yeah, and that was kind of what we alluded to earlier in the off season when we were talking about, what does our starting 5 look like? Is it Kevin Herter? Is it Keon? Is it Malik? And we talked about what the benefit of having all 3 of those guys out there is. And the upside of having Kevon out there has been exactly what, he has shown this year so far. Like everything that could go right with Herter being a part of that starting 5 has gone right. I think that plus minus, he was minus like 29 in that Lakers game. It's so skewed. It's so skewed because
Yeah.
I don't agree with that whatsoever. He had the most deflections. He was playing great defense. He was out there actually making shots. He found his rhythm in that game. And to see his plus minus at the end of the night as poor as it was, I was like, that doesn't represent the kind of game that he had and the kind of response that he's had to his last season. So everything that we're seeing from him, it's the flashes of his 2022 campaign with the Kings, and it's perfect. He fits really well with the starting lineup.
Yeah, and I really think these so when we talk about these last 2 games that we just went through, and we're watching the offense, the starting 5 really just look consistent offensively. I I like this group. And when we started seeing Keon coming off the bench, and now we have the bench unit of Malik and Trey and Keon and Alex Len, I really like this 9 that Mike has found, and I like the way that he's using them, mixing each of these guys in at the right time. I really felt like having that group of guys play together really got the most out of this team, and it didn't feel like they were able to find different ways to attack, different ways to score, whether it was Demar hitting mid-range shots, whether it's De'Aaron finally getting more aggressive and hitting shots, and Domas playing extremely consistent like he has been. Game one, he only had 1 assist, and now the last 3 games he's gotten back to his assisting ways, including a triple double against the Lakers. So I think now they're really starting to find, okay, we can attack with De'Aaron here. We can attack with DeMar here. Oh, Domas has got the mismatch. All right, let's give it to him. And I really think the communication between these guys is really starting to click now that they're getting more real reps together.
100%. I love that you pointed that out because in the last game, really the last 2 games, but especially in this last game, I noticed the Kings were beating were beating both teams with essentially 3 or 4 different styles of offense. Like I saw the standard point guard center pick and roll play that you'd see with either De'Aaron Fox or Domantas Sabonis, or you'd see with Demar handling the ball or Malik. It was that standard, right? The pick and roll.
Yeah.
You also saw the DHO, the direct handoffs with Sabonis. You also saw the isolation plays with Demar, Fox, Sabonis, Monk, Keegan, even Huerter last night. Like all these guys were hitting. And when you have multiple ways to beat a team where you're throwing multiple looks a quarter, not just throughout a game, but a quarter, like that third quarter against the Jazz last night, we threw every possible offensive look at them and they had no response. Mind you, they didn't have Lauri Markkanen in the second half at all. But I would hate to be on here talking about how they didn't have Lauri Markkanen and didn't take advantage. I mean, this is what good teams do, right? They take advantage of what's given to them, whether it's an injury or whether it's a night where they're coming off a back-to-back, the other team's coming off a back-to-back. The Kings were on the back-to-back, and they took advantage of having the momentum of winning the night before and having the momentum of having the better team. So it was really nice to see the Kings find that rhythm offensively. It was dangerous.
Yeah, and a good point on the back-to-backs, because remember we talked last year, it was all about they lost their like first 6 back-to-backs. Like they couldn't find a way to win the second night, and they were able to do that. And granted, like, you know, I thought about this too. Like I wonder if we would have been 4-0 had we played the Blazers and the Jazz first in the first 2 games, and then played Minnesota and the Lakers when we had found our rhythm, right? I think, you know, but again, we took care of business against teams that we were supposed to be better than, and that was a promising sign. And you know, one at home, one on the road, that was huge. So I think we're starting to see now this group, you know, has, since they were finding ways to win last year in these kind of back-to-back situations, you're seeing them bring that to the table this year. And I really do think that the Demar element to it, I want to talk about him for a second, because I mentioned in the first, you know, after the Minnesota game that I'm like, ooh, they might be just feeding him a little bit too much to like tailor to the new guy. I think I think they're trying to figure out how to use him properly, and I think they're starting to figure it out. The occasional spurts of Demar, if there's a run happening, let him get to the free throw line, and he finds ways to create runs and also slow down runs. And now it's just a matter of finding that balance to where this Kings team plays fast pace, and they brought this up on the Blazers game. This Kings team plays fast and with pace, and they got to find ways, because Demar, as good as he is getting to the free throw line, we got to be careful that if that's all we're doing, if that's our main source of offense for a 7-8 minute stretch, you know, it might slow us down more than we anticipate. So again, getting those points are valuable, and it's good because he's making them, but it is one of those things that I think they need to figure. I think as we'll see, as the season goes on, we'll see more of a balance to that, but I've loved what he's brought.
Yeah, and I'm especially looking forward to when we find that balance, or more specifically when Demar finds that balance, because I mean, he's a vet. He is a seasoned vet. He's a leader. He has this winning mentality that, I mean, it's aura, right? The second he entered the building, everything changed from every aspect of how the Kings view the season, how they view winning, playing basketball. And you're especially starting to see it as he's playing. And you just talked about it. He has this ability to read what's happening in a game. What do we need? What needs to happen here? And you started to see it, especially in these last 2 games, where he's locking into that rhythm. He's finding his fit. And by the way, the fit is beautiful. All you haters, you're all in for a treat. He's able to slow down the game when it's going a little bit too quick and we need a bucket. And he's able to bring that just elite isolation play to the table that I can't say that we were lacking, but we were lacking a consistent amount of for the last couple years. And on top of that, when the game is going too quick, like you said, to be able to slow it down, get to the free throw line, quiet down those away crowds, like take the energy out of the building. We're going to be seeing some longer games here in Sacramento as the Kings, going into last night, we're shooting the most free throws in the league. On top of that, making the most. What a complete shift, right? But it's awesome. His impact has been immediate, and it's been everything that the Kings have needed so far.
Yeah, and especially at the free throw line, like not just him, but De'Aaron and Domas are shooting better. Now, it depends on, that's not going to last the full season. I think De'Aaron's shooting like 93% right now. That's definitely not going to last. But I like I'm liking the different ways this team can attack, and I think in just a few games they're really starting to click. And it's only going to take a few more games for till we see kind of the next step. And on top of that, they're figuring all this out on offense while also being relatively effective on defense. Like the Lakers game was a high scoring game for both teams. It was back and forth. But I thought against Minnesota they played really well defensively. I thought against Portland they were suffocating. I thought against Utah they were suffocating, and
Yeah.
they were getting deflections, and Demar's getting involved. He's averaging 2 steals a game so far. Like, so for those who thought his defensive, he wouldn't be that good of a presence, I think they found a good way of playing aggressive defense, get in your face, muddy up the waters, and force the turnovers like we were talking about in the preseason. And I think they've really found ways to use that defense to make themselves better offensively too, and get more fast break points and kill momentum. And I'm loving. We're 2-2, but a lot of good teams are 2-2 right now, and
Hmm.
it's so early in the season, and that's why we don't need to panic for slow starts out of the gate. If we're not 0-4, it would have been a different conversation, right? So we're getting these wins under our belt. This team has won together. Demar got to light the beam for the first time against Portland. The vibes are up. So I think now this team is trending up, and we got some good matchups. We got Atlanta coming up next. Like, I'm excited to see how we look if we can continue to build, because Atlanta's a solid team. They got good pieces. They got the number one pick, Richard. Trae Young is back in the fold and playing well. So I'm interested to see how we look against them moving forward. But I think we're starting to find the pieces on how we can attack different teams.
Yeah, I do want to point out one thing. The Sacramento Kings have some leading scorers right now. And I say some leading scorers because we have three guys averaging over 20 points a game right now, which is the first trio in franchise history to start a season averaging 20 plus since 1961. Okay. We got Domas averaging 24.3, Demar at 23, and Foxy at 21.5. So you want to talk about just that perfect fit, just everything clicking. Like, actually, on that point, not everything is clicking, and these guys are still doing this, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so just seeing that immediate impact when we're still trying to figure out exactly the identity of this team moving forward. Like, I want to see what these guys look like 20 games into the season.
Yeah.
When this team really finds a rhythm, Demar talked about it in a post game after, I think it was game 1. He said once we figure some things out, once we, really kind of find our rhythm, we're going to be scary. We're going to be rolling. And I said to my girlfriend the other day, we were watching game 1 and the Kings went on a run at one point. And I'm like, this team is going to blow out a lot of teams. There are going to be games where I'm sure that they get blown out because if shots aren't falling, it's tough to rely on the defense the last couple of years. But maybe things have shifted. We'll see. Time will tell. But the offense, when that thing clicks, wow, I just don't see many teams being able to compete with that.
Yeah, and speaking of, like, getting blown out, I think that's something that we saw a little bit of in the Lakers game where, oh man, we're down 15, how do we respond? And then we immediately just close the gap. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that this team, and that's what DeMar brings, he has that presence that allows this team to kind of fight back in a way that we probably couldn't have last year. So I'm excited to see all the pieces clicking, and with the past couple of nights when we're having Malik and Keon coming off the bench and Trey and Alex Len, like that's a good backup group to supplant with these starters, and it all seems they're starting to find a rhythm now that these guys have played together for a few years, and DeMar is really the only new addition to that consistent group. This team knows how to play together, and I think that consistency that you see with these teams when they're steadily improving and trying to build a contender. And you saw this with the Nuggets, like, Jokic and Murray playing together for a long time. Then you add Porter, and then you get a couple years of him. You add Gordon, and that was the piece. So now it's like we're starting to get these pieces. Okay, DeMar and De'Aaron have played together now. Domas and De'Aaron have played together for 2 years. Keegan's been with them for 2 years. Kevin's been here. So it's like now it's starting to culminate into a consistent unit, and now DeMar can really take us over the edge, especially if once we start getting into the thick of it and playoff battles start happening, battles for seeding and games really matter. It's going to be crucial to have him. And again, super happy with what I've seen. and I'm just excited. I'm excited. I think all the things that the energy, the intensity from this team is they're playing a little bit more, I want to say locked in, but also a little bit more carefree because last year was I think was their version of a playoff hangover. The first time in 17 years this team gets in the playoffs and the expectations raise like crazy, and they kind of succumb to that a little bit. And now they're like, okay, the pressure is kind of off them because they think all these other teams are going to be better, even with Demar. So they're just like, okay, we're back to being the underdogs. We're comfortable again. Like this is where we want to be.
Yeah, and it was really nice to hear after the first win of the season against the Blazers, De'Aaron and I believe it was Herter. They both used the same similar phrases, but then eventually used the same word when they talked about the approach coming into that game, and it was a sense of urgency and ultimately just the 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 immediate need to get that win, and it was eye opening for me because we talked about how last season was such a letdown because it seemed like this team played like they had already earned something by making the playoffs the season before and by going game 7 with Steph Curry as one of the all-time greats. Like it seemed like they earned something. And so you remember, do you remember that interview that like podcast that Draymond was on with LeBron and all those guys, and they're talking about like not being able to get up for some of these games, or
Yeah.
playing like the Sacramento Kings, and then the next season the Kings pop off and make the playoffs. But
Yeah.
it was kind of like, it felt like that approach for the Kings last year in some of those games where it's like you're playing the lowly Detroit Pistons, you're playing the Charlotte Hornets, you're playing the Portland Trailblazers with everybody out the day after Christmas, and you're losing all these games. And it was like, I can't I can't say that the teams that they're playing are better than them. It sheerly comes down to, it looks like effort, and the effort probably comes off of, are you actually getting up to play for this game? And so with the approach that I heard them have towards this first win, and talking about just moving forward, it seems like there's a sense of urgency on the season now, not just on a game to game basis, but just on the season itself. And that for me is really eye opening because I think that's exactly what this team needs. And I think you can ride a lot of that momentum, that if you burn that flame of urgency underneath you every single night, you will be able to ride that a long way in terms of this 82 game season. Like there's going to be teams who don't get up for the Sacramento Kings this year. I mean,
Yeah.
that's just, it's simple as that. There's 17 plus years of just horrendous basketball. They're still not ready for it. But if you show up game in and game out, no matter if you're playing the best or the worst team, and you bring that offensive firepower and at least some effort, a middle of the pack effort on defense, you're going to win a lot of games. And that's what I'm looking forward to this season. And that's why I had anticipated that 50-55 win, somewhere in there, win total.
Yeah, and we're seeing bits of pieces that can get us to that point. And so I want to segue just a tiny bit here. I want to give a couple random shout outs here. I want to shout out number one, super random. Rudy Gay retired from the NBA. One of the first jerseys I bought for Sacramento. Shout out
Yeah.
Rudy. Congrats to him. He had an awesome career. Was part of the last trio that we had here that was a part of 20 points. With 3 guys that had 20 points. Just an awful team. So it's nice that we have that kind of switch up here. So wish him all the best. Congrats, Rudy. And I also want to shout out De'Aaron Fox specifically here because he did just eclipse 10,000 points. And he's the first King, and considering how awesome Boogie was in his prime, he never hit this point. He's the first King that we've seen in the Sacramento era that's hit, since Mitch Richmond, that's hit 10,000 points. And to think about that just shows the amount of guys that we've had come in here that have come and gone. And I remember you and I talk about this all the time. We were there. I forget. I think it was your aunt's house when we were watching.
Yeah.
We were watching the draft on the TV on the floor, and we're just like, I want them to pick De'Aaron Fox, and we picked De'Aaron Fox, and then now we're here, and it's come with a playoff run. It's come with awesome plays, game winners. It's come with incredible success, and obviously a huge contract that he's earned, and that shows loyalty, and that's something that we weren't sure that was going to happen with De'Aaron. So it was cool. It's cool to see just how far he's come. He's in his 8th year now. And now just the leader that he's become and the face of the franchise, I'm just happy to see how much, I'm excited to see how much more he can do for us.
Yeah, shout out Rudy. Definitely love there. Always love former Sacramento King. But Foxy's impact on the Kings, he'll go down as one of the greatest Sacramento Kings in franchise history. Uh, whether he signs that next contract with us or not, or he's somewhere else. Like he could end his season right now in his tenure here at Sacramento, and he would still go down as probably a top 10 all time as a Sacramento King. And
Yeah.
that's really, really cool. And it's really special. So love Foxy, love exactly what he's bringing. 10,000 points is phenomenal. He's also now passed the third all time in steals for the Sacramento Kings. And so he's just his impact on a game to game basis, whether he's all effort or half effort or whatever the case, he's always one of the best players on the court. And just to be able to have somebody like that for the past however many years has been just so special for the Sacramento Kings and for this fan base who has been hurting for so long.
Yeah. And now you pair him with just an awesome team, and now they have the potential to do something special. Um, do you have any takeaways of things, or maybe things you want to see for this next stretch of games that we have for this week from the Kings?
Yeah, so I just talked about that effort, and I want to also say it's not like they show up every game and decide they're not going to play tonight. They're always going to play, right?
Hmm.
But that I talked about that urgency and what kind of effort that brings on a night to night basis. I want to see the same thing going forward. I mean, this next 5 game stretch or so, really 4 games, you have a great chance to really take control of your team, take control of your conference in a lot of ways if you can string together all these wins. There's some teams in here who aren't better than you. I would argue you're better than all of the next 4 teams coming up. And until you see probably the Phoenix Suns, and that's going to be a really interesting matchup.
Excited. Whew.
I'm excited for that one.
Ready.
So until you hit Phoenix, just ball out. Figure your play out, like get comfortable, find that rhythm, keep going, like exactly what they've been doing, just continue building off of it. And if you can continue doing that, come that December, January time where you're playing home game after home game after home game, this team's going to be rolling, bro. Like just keep going.
I'm excited for the NBA Cup, dude. It's coming up, and those, in the new court, and I'm excited to.
Yeah.
These guys stepped up last year in a huge way during the Cup games, and I know, I think they're gonna feel it this year because they're itching for more playoff experience, and that's what the NBA Cup will bring. So I'm really excited for those matchups coming up too. But yes, I agree that this next stretch of games, especially these next three, you gotta take advantage of these kind of games that you're able to get before things really get difficult and before you have to figure things out on the fly. And we want to take advantage, and especially when in the West, we don't know what these next 10 games will do to your potential playoff seeding or how hard you're going to have to work to get to that level moving forward. So we really need to take advantage of these games now. I know early on I was like, oh, it's only the first few games. But now once you hit those first few games, now it's like, okay, we need to figure things out and get right and get consistent in order to advance where we want to go.
Yeah, fully agree.
All right, so we will be right back. This was enough of the Kings for now. We will brush up on them as we go. We'll go on a week-to-week basis and touch base, but we'll definitely see that win total number keep climbing up, and we're really excited to see what happens. But we're going to take a quick break and transition over to some football, so we'll be right back. All right, we are back. So we're here to talk some football now. Ben, I don't know who needed a bye week more, the Niners or you, brother. What do you think?
I think it was me, to be honest with you, because I'm not injured, but I feel like it, bro. I will tell you that.
Yeah, I can imagine. So the good thing is you don't have to go into the bye that upset because the Niners did what they did best and beat the freaking Cowboys yet again. It looked pretty good until it almost didn't. But you want to talk about any main takeaways from that game?
Well, here's the thing. It didn't look good, and then it looked good, and then it didn't look good. And that's kind of how the season's gone so far, if I really think about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, let me just kind of talk about that game for a couple seconds here before I get into the bye here. But so the game itself, first half, I was like really mad. because I'm seeing the halftime score. We had only had field goals on the board at that point, and we had so many more opportunities than the Cowboys, and it was just self-inflicted wounds. It was like 3 penalties for like 80 yards of offense, like, and a touchdown off the board for Debo, because we were just like, it was lackadaisical, bad penalties left and right. And it just felt like the story of the season, where it's like we get something going and then something happens, and we get something going and something happens. And so it's really frustrating. So at that point, I'm looking at halftime and I'm like, they have to turn this around. Like, they have to come out at halftime and just, they have to come out and do something that gives them momentum. And they really did. They came out, they took full control, they laid it on the Cowboys and took a commanding lead, and then started letting things slip up. And it was like they kind of took their foot off the accelerator, which we've seen so many times with Kyle Shanahan. And we talk about these breakdowns defensively, not just offensively this year, but defensively. Like, you'll have 2 or 3 really good defensive plays during a drive, and then you let like a first down because our third down defense is terrible. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But they'll have 2 or 3 really good plays, and then let up a first down, another first down, and they just keep these drives going against the Niners. And it's like, okay, we got to get a stop. And then finally you start to kind of put things together, and then you leave CD wide open. I mean, he had the world behind him in the end zone, and that made it a 6-point game. And so the Niners, I won't talk about it. We all watched it, but they got the win, but it still didn't feel super convincing. You know what I mean? Like, it was, and every win against the Cowboys has felt pretty convincing, whether they've been close or not, because for the last 4 years, the Niners have been the better team convincingly, whether the record has proved it or not. They're the more physical team, they're the more put together team, and they're the more reliable team. And in this one, it felt so much closer than it really needed to be. And so it was frustrating from that aspect.
Well, I mean, if there's one thing you know for sure, there's death, taxes, and George Kittle waking up to play the Cowboys better than anybody else. What an explosion by him, and had it not been for him, it could have been a completely different game too. But I agree. I think that obviously you guys just exploded for that 21-point third quarter, and it felt like at that point you're like, okay, all we got to do is not mess up. And then it didn't happen, and then the Cowboys had a legitimate chance to score. They had one shot to score, and obviously that didn't happen. But the fact that the Niners were in that position, you're right, has kind of been the story of the Niners all year. And the record attests to it. They're 4-4. It's about as up and down as you can get at this stage of the season. So now that the bye is upon you guys, now that you guys get a week of rest, let's talk about now, because it's literally the midseason. It's literally the middle point of the season. Let's talk about your Niners and your first half assessment of them. What do you think from offense, defense, special teams? What would you rate them so far this year?
So I'll start with the overall grade. And just like you said, I'm going to do a grade on the overall. I'm going to do a grade on the offense, the defense, special teams, and then the coaching. But I will start with the overall grade and get into it. Honestly, I have them at a C+.
That makes sense.
And I can't go any higher because I don't feel like they've played well enough, but I can't go any lower because of all the circumstances around why this team has struggled. Like, as much as you don't want to use injuries as a excuse, when you have, get this, okay, make sure you write this down. When you have, since August 27th, 50 total injuries to your team, it's pretty hard to get things going on a consistent week-to-week basis.
Right.
So I can't be too upset. We're 4-4. We're very much in the running for our division, which is hilarious, because if you'd asked me if the 4-4 Niners would still be in the running in a division where I thought the Rams would be really, really good this year, and then they run into a very similar issue as the Niners, like 4-4, I'd have been like, well, we're looking at almost out of it at this point. But they're very much right in the picture. We all know that Niners in midseason form is a scary season, So I'm just hoping that coming out of the bye, we get some players back. Obviously, we're going to get CMC back. We're going to get Hufanga back. Dre Greenlaw is ramping up. He's going to start practicing soon, believe it or not. He'll be available out on the field later on in this season. So we're starting to get some of these key guys back. Obviously, you're not going to have Hargrave. You're not going to have Brandon Ayuk. You're not going to have some of these big names who are out for the season. But you get back some of the health that you've been missing, and this bye week is essential for that. And I mean, I can't be more happy with when the bye came, because I wouldn't want it any earlier and I wouldn't want it any later, because at this point you need this to kind of separate your season. You're halfway through, like you said. This is a perfect point for the Niners to reevaluate things and then set up for the second half run. So offensively, I'm going to grade them a C+. Obviously, they've had inconsistent lineups due to injuries, blah, blah, blah. I think Purdy's been good. He hasn't been great this season, and a lot of that is to do with the week to week who he's throwing to, situational. It's been a little weird. Kyle Shanahan and his play calling, we've talked about that. Subpar the last couple weeks. I've seen Kyle really get back to his normal play calling, or at least the last week. And it's hard in that Chiefs game to call a consistent playbook when Mr. Playbook himself, Deebo Samuel, was out. And all week long, you were planning to play him. So it's one thing if you don't have Deebo all week long and you're planning to not have Deebo. It's another if you've planned to have this player all week long and you don't have it. So situations like that, and then the red zone struggles. If 4 of 8 games, they've gone over 30 points, which is pretty good, but 23 field goals so far on the season, 9 of those between the 20 and the 29 yard line. And that's where I'm like, you've left so many points out there.
Yep.
And it's not just in those win games. It's in the games you've lost as well. Like, if I think about how many opportunities this offense has missed out down the field, missed out on, it makes me wonder if you convert, I said it was 23 field goals, if you convert 6 more of those to touchdowns, what would our record be? Would we be 7-1?
Yeah.
8-0? 6-2? I'm not going to dive into that because there's no point, but it would be interesting to see. So I give them, speaking of C, I give them that C+. And overall, I think that things are going to start getting better as you find more consistency with lineups. Hopefully injuries get a little bit better as the season progresses. But moving on to the defense, I got the defense at a C-. I'm not thrilled with what I've seen. Obviously we've got a semi-new system going on with Nick Sorensen and what he's bringing in. I'm not mad at what he's doing. I think Nick is starting to figure out this defense a little bit more, especially these last 3 weeks, actually. I'm pretty pleased with what I've seen. I haven't seen a lot of those big plays downfield where Justin Jefferson goes for 98 yards. I haven't seen big plays breaking open. What I am seeing is struggles on third downs, struggles to stop teams in the red zone. When I really looked at this team, like, they're 10th overall defensively, like just in total defense, they're 10th. In rushing defense, they're 4th. And passing defense, they're up there as well. But then where it gets hairy is total points scored against them. They're like 17th. And then red zone efficiency in terms of stopping, they're like 23rd. And then when it comes to, like getting a takeaway and taking advantage of things like that, they're on the lower percentile of that too. So it's like all the areas where you need a defense to step up, when you need them to make a play, when you need them to stop something, stop a drive. I haven't seen that happen. And I haven't seen the defense come out and win a game for this Niners team. It has been the offense every single time. We have 4 wins on the season, and those 4 games, that offense has had to put up 30 points to get the job done. So those kind of things are concerning for me, because 30 points last year for the 49ers, pretty easy to do. You were pretty healthy for the vast majority of the year. You had consistency throughout the year. This year, you haven't had CMC. You haven't had consistency from week to week on either end of the football field. And so you really can't bank on 30 points on a game-to-game basis. And if you want to talk about playoff football, dude, 30 points in a playoff game, like, yeah, it happens, but playoff games are tough. Every play has that much more weight. Every window is that much tighter. Like, it is a very defensive game in the playoffs. Things are called tighter. It's just a different beast. So to think about the fact this defense could be going into a playoff situation in 8 weeks and talking about having these red zone issues, these third down issues, it's concerning for me. I'm not sure if you've seen similar things.
Well, and I guess that's kind of been the thing with the Niners' success is, yeah, the offense has always been crazy and always been good, but at the same time, a huge part of their success was how good this defense was. Consistently a top 5 unit, and it's not like they have all the success with this defense being middle of the pack. They've been incredible every single year in this Kyle Shanahan era that like they've had during this Super Bowl window. And I think that's the thing that surprised me this year is just how inconsistent they looked. I think there were moves that needed to be made, like with Devondre Campbell, he looks a little slow at times, like, and you can't replace Greenlaw like that. And then again, with the
Right.
consistent injuries you guys have to deal with on a week to week basis, there's never been a rhythm and flow. And you lose Hargrave too. Your defensive line isn't what it could be when you have Bosa on there. So it's not the strength anymore. And I think you've seen, especially like you saw the Cardinals game and things like that, where the defense was the one giving up the crucial play at the end. And when in past years, like even if Jimmy threw a pick, even if Brock threw a pick, the defense would come back right away and take it away,
Right.
or just a quick 3 and out, and it wouldn't matter.
Right.
And now the offense needs to play better in order for the defense, because they don't know for sure what they're going to get from the defense on a week to week basis. So when you play these teams that are better, and your schedule coming up is going to get tough, and it's one of those things where the defense needs to improve, especially as the offense will start finding its form with some of these dudes coming back. The defense needs to find something that works for them in order for this to work long term. And like you said, once you get to the playoffs, it's a whole different animal, and that defense was a huge reason that the Niners made it to the Super Bowl. So it's one of those things that if that defense isn't there, that could be the reason this team doesn't get where it wants to go this year.
Exactly. So that's a lot of the reason why, I have that defense ranked C- is because I look at those last 4 years, those last 5 years, and what that defense has looked like under Robert Saleh and under D'Amico Ryans and even under Steve Wilkes. Like, I was not advocating that Steve Wilkes loses a job by any means, but I wasn't thrilled with what I've seen from Steve. But I think I might take what Steve brought over what Nick has been doing so far. But
Yeah.
This obviously we're 8 weeks in. There's been inconsistency up and down, right? You don't know on a week to week basis what's going to happen, and that's been kind of just how the NFL's been this year. I mean,
Oh yeah.
There really isn't a team that stands out above all. I mean, you could say the Chiefs just based on the record, right? But even that, like, their defense has been carrying Mahomes.
Yeah.
And, argue with a wall. It's the truth. Look at the stats. They back it up. Mahomes is a really good quarterback. Don't get me wrong. He can still lead a game-winning drive any time of the day, any time of the night, right? But that defense is without him, or without that defense, that team is probably in a 4-4 situation, just like the Niners. So, talk about getting a job done when you need to. That's what the Chiefs have been doing this year, is what the Niners did when they had like Jimmy G and went to the Super Bowl. So I need to see more from defense for me to really feel a lot more confident in this team. Moving on to special teams, a D+. I hate our special teams. Like, I'm going to keep it short and sweet. Like, you need to be better on the kick return and punt return defense. You can't let your kickers be making the last tackle, because kickers don't know how to tackle. People can light up our kickers for not knowing how to tackle all you want, but they should never be the ones having to make the tackle.
Exactly.
The fact that they're the ones making the tackle means there's been so many other dudes who have already missed their job and their assignments. So that needs to be a lot better. That needs to be tightened up. It's so inconsistent. I feel like I'm just beating a dead horse with this inconsistent thing, but I swear it's true. Cause like, one game or one play, you'll see them make an outstanding play where they knock the ball free, jar the ball free on a punt return, or get a, make some kind of big play. And it's like, yes, that's awesome. More of that. And then the next play, they give up a punt return touchdown. And I'm like, okay, we're back. This is cool. We're back to being inconsistent. So
Yeah.
D+, not thrilled with what I've seen. Last but not least, the coaching. C. I give him a C because I've seen better and I expect better. Offensively, Shanahan has had his hands tied. Players going out for the season, multiple games at a time. You don't have Mr. Playbook from week to week, Deebo Samuel. There's a lot of factors into why Shanny is kind of in the situation he's in now. But at the same time, he is his own worst enemy. And it's so glaring to me at this point. Like, he has trust issues. I was thinking
For
about
sure.
this today. I don't have a report or anything on this, but I was thinking about this. There was an interview that the media had with Brock. I believe it was about a week ago. And they asked Brock, along the lines of, do you audible at the line of scrimmage? Do you call audibles? And he gave this long-winded answer that alluded to no, he doesn't call audibles because Kyle basically doesn't let him. Kyle has a play call, and there's a couple ways that play can go. There's a hot route, and then there's a dump off, or there's a switch up that they can call that you can call it an audible, but ultimately you're not changing the play. And so I was thinking about this today, and I'm like, wow, Brock has a ceiling to him, just like most players do. Brock's ceiling might not be as high as some players in this league. That's fine. But he hasn't hit his ceiling, and he may not under Kyle Shanahan, because it seems like, call this a hot take, it seems like Kyle Shanahan, as much as he helps Brock and vice versa, he's also limiting Brock in what he can do and what he can learn if you're not letting a quarterback call an audible at the line of scrimmage when he sees something that you don't. He's out there throwing the football. You're not on the crow's nest. You're on the sideline.
Right.
I'm not saying that he's calling plays incorrectly. He doesn't know what's going on. He absolutely knows what's going on. But I don't know if it's an ego thing. And I think about it and I'm like, look how many Super Bowls he's blown. He would have had at least 3 Super Bowls if he would have kept 10 plus point leads. And that goes back to that Falcons game. He was the offensive coordinator there when he blew a 28-3 lead. And obviously he wasn't in charge of the defense, but he was on that side. And maybe that's where his trust issues started. I don't know. but it does show at times. And so I've seen it a lot this year as well, where he's throwing in these young players who very clearly haven't gotten many runs on the training grounds in this system because they're out there and they have to call simplistic plays. They can't call the same style motion plays and switch up plays where you're confusing a defense because these guys simply haven't gone through those reps yet. They're calling simple out routes and simple cut routes and shotgun plays that just are so easy for a defense to read, especially through 8 weeks watching the same damn thing happen time in and time out. Right. So, from that regard, I'm upset with Shanny. I still think he's one of the best offensive minds in football when he has all of his pieces going. And that's what I'm banking on. You get CMC back. Do not abuse him. He still has Achilles tendonitis. This is a very real thing. You have Jordan Mason, who's dealing with a shoulder issue, but you also have Isaac Guerrero.
That's right.
Please do not use Christian McCaffrey 90% of the time. Please, please, please. I'm begging you. You don't have to. You've seen how much success has come with using these other 2 running backs. They are very good. And the running system that Shanny has is great. So if you can kind of lean on the trio of running backs through the rest of this season, keep CMC healthy, run him like crazy in the playoffs when he is amped and ready to go and feeling healthier, that might be the recipe for success. And then we talked about Sorensen. It's getting better from week to week, but there's still some boneheaded decisions here and there. So overall, yeah, I'm not thrilled with the season to this point, but it could be a lot worse.
So do you think that I completely understand why you wouldn't be thrilled? You're 4-4, you're in the struggle in the division. but there was also like 2 weeks ago we were in this spot where it's like it could have been a lot worse, right?
Oh yeah.
So do you think now that 4-4 and all the potential for improvement here, do you think you're in the spot you want to be to at least make the playoffs? Like this team, the Niners are still dangerous. The Niners are still the team, one of the few teams you don't want to face going into the playoffs. In the NFC, it's going to be a wild time. But I think given the way everyone else is playing, if the Niners don't shore up and don't win the division, there might be a shot that they don't make the playoffs if they're the second seed in the NFC West. Are you confident in your team's ability to win the NFC West at least once hopefully some of these guys come back?
Yeah, I am. You're gonna see all these guys again, all these teams in your division again, and it's another chance to take it to them and learn from your mistakes the last time. The thing is, with all the 49ers losses this season, none of them have really been a blowout. And I mean, one of them kind of felt like it, but it really boiled down to a few plays. And I know that's football, right? But the thing is, the Niners were in every single game, regardless of what was going on before, during, or after the football game. And so for me, this team only has up to go, to be honest with you, unless you, knock on wood, lose Brock Purdy, right? If you're getting CMC back and you have all these other guys who are coming back from injury and getting healthier, you're going to start to find a little bit more consistency. You're going to find that you're going to be able to dip into that playbook last year that you had last year and were dominating with, because you have CMC again. And it gives me a sense of confidence knowing that you're going to have that backbone back. But there's things that need to change, and ultimately I want to put a vast majority of the future potential success on Shanahan and his ego. I think that Shanny really needs to lean on his young guys, or guys that he doesn't consistently use. Because like I just said, and I'll build off a little bit more, past players, young and old, have talked about being on the 49ers and not really getting a shot, because everyone who's already a part of Shanahan's system is essentially a lock. They don't really get much of a chance. And from that perspective, when you see guys like Brandon Ayuk go down for a season, Jawan Jennings go out with a hip pointer, Debo getting sick with pneumonia, and then you have the situation where you're running straight up all youngsters and George Kittle, it shows, and it rears its ugly head when you realize those kind of things are true. Like, he really doesn't practice with those dudes. And that's not to say they don't get, reps at practice. And they're not just sitting around on a bench. They're getting reps, but it's not the same reps. And you can tell. So I need to see if this team is going to be good for the rest of this year. You have to realize injuries are still going to happen.
Yeah.
But if you can get these guys involved in this bye week, get them involved in the next couple weeks, coming out of the bye, playing the Buccaneers, who are also banged up. If you can get them involved, find them a rhythm, and then moving through the rest of the season where you can lean on depth, which is something the Niners don't really have, but you can kind of create depth if you at least give your guys reps at training, at practices. That's going to be monumental for this team moving forward, because next man up has always been a great thing for the 49ers and a great thing for winning teams. It's something the Niners have leaned on for a number of years. And for whatever reason this year, it really hasn't showed. So I'm banking on that.
All right. Well, do you have any final thoughts now that you got the bye week? Now you get to breathe a little bit. Any final thoughts on this team before we switch on over here?
I've got hope. It's been a rough season so far. It hasn't really been fun to watch. There's been flashes of good, and I'm hoping that this team can get back to the form, or close to the form that they were last year, to ultimately make that last run.
I agree. I hope for that too, because the NFL's better when the Niners are cooking and everything's flowing well. And I want our playoff matchup to happen, and we need both of our teams to continue to play well if we want that to happen. So
Exactly.
Speaking of, we will transfer on here to the Eagles. So the Eagles, for lack of a better term, dominated the Bengals on the road, 37-17. It was an awesome game to watch. And it was really a tale of, again, no first quarter points. Love that. But part of that was because, the Eagles didn't get the ball. The Bengals had the ball for the first 10 minutes, which was crazy. They were just chipping away, getting there. And I was like, oh, crap, if it's going to be like this all game, it's going to be a problem. But the offense figured it out. The defense figured it out. And honestly, for this game, I'm just going to go to my moments of the game. And I only really have a few because, again, there was a lot of good things in this game. But the game didn't become what it was until after the score was 17-17. And the Eagles really broke it open. And it was supplanted by really just a few plays. And I just want to talk about the two that really set this game apart. And it starts, I'm going to work kind of backwards here. It's going to start after we went up ahead 24-17. It was the ensuing possession, and the Bengals got aggressive. And it almost felt, and they brought it up on the broadcast, it almost felt desperate. They went for it on a 4th and 1. And it was on their own side. It was around the 40-ish, 45-yard line. And it wasn't in a spot where the Bengals offense, they were still looking pretty good. Like, they still looked like they could put up points, bet on the defense. But the defense wasn't really, they had just given up a big play that I'm about to talk about. But the biggest play that really set the stage for the rest of the game was that Cooper DeJean stop on that 4th and 1, where he has Jamar Chase one-on-one in the open field on a 4th down, and he just lays him out and makes a huge tackle, and then that was a huge play. And he and Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean were tasked with handling Jamar Chase for most of the day, and they did an excellent job. And if had it not been for that play, the Eagles scored. The Eagles had a weird drive afterwards where Jalen lost his shoe, but they went out 27-17 and never really looked back, and yeah, it was really weird. But that play in particular really set the stage for the defense the rest of the way. That Bengals offense never scored another point, and I was really loving that. So then we go to the main moment of the game, and it was that Jalen Hurts bomb to Devontae Smith to put the Eagles up 24-17. And what was awesome about that was, number one, that was the longest throw in terms of air yards of Jalen Hurts' career, and it was a beautiful throw. It was like 59 plus yards in that one. And Devontae made it a really tough catch. It was contested in the back of the end zone, and he had to settle in a specific spot. And I really love that. Just shows the talent that this team has, that it's not just AJ, it's Devontae. That's why I got the jersey. Smitty is always just like that class act guy who you can rely on, who's just so talented. And you could just see the excitement that he had afterwards. He was hyped up. They had the mic'd up on him, and 95% of that mic'd up from the touchdown was bleeped out because he was just he was pretty excited. He was about it. So it was really those two plays, because they happened on back-to-back possessions, back-to-back series, really just set the stage for the rest of the way. And the Eagles really just took it to them on the road. And the Bengals team, the Bengals had yet to win at home. The Bengals have lost to some bad teams this year. The Bengals are up and down. And the Eagles, you know, based off of record and based off of vibes and everything, the Eagles should have beaten this Bengals team. But Joe Burrow's playing like a top 3 quarterback and is keeping them in every game that they've been in this year. And the Eagles did a really good job from quarter 2 on, flustering the heck out of him. So I shout out to the Eagles for really just doing what they needed to do to get this win. And for those, and we should have said this earlier, but for those who want to check out our post games, we really went in depth. Ben on the Cowboys game, myself on the Bengals game. So it's on our feed if you guys want to check it out. We went into detail and gave out some more game balls there. But those are my moments of the game, because it was really just that we just took that momentum and never looked back. And I was really happy with how we responded this week.
Yeah, it was a really great game. For me, the last 3 weeks have been kind of a turning point in the Eagles season in my eyes. And the biggest reason isn't just the wins, but the biggest reason for me is Jalen Hurts hasn't turned the ball over in those 3 weeks.
That's right.
And that's something that I want to highlight, and maybe you can talk about a little bit more in depth at some point. But, Jalen Hurts up until the last 3 weeks has been a turnover machine. There's no denying that. the dude was leading the league in turnovers at one point. And through a certain amount of game stretch, he had like the most turnovers. And so in a lot of ways, you set your defense up for failure when you turn the ball over at any point, because regardless, you're putting that unit back out on the field when they weren't necessarily supposed to be out there just yet. And you're leaving points out there. Like, everybody knows what turnovers are. So the fact that he hasn't turned the ball over, he's been safe with it, whether those drives fizzle out to a 3 and out or whatever the case, regardless, you're not turning the ball over on your own field. You're at the very least punting it down the field and forcing the other team to go down the distance on you. So I've been really proud of what I've seen from Jalen in the last 3 weeks. And I think that the last 3 weeks have been not just a confidence builder for him as a player and a teammate, but for his teammates as well. I mean, to be able to rely on your leader, because that is the leader of that team, for your leader to go out and make a statement now 3 weeks in a row where we're taking care of the ball and we're balling out. That's massive for a team that is coming into the season wanting to completely flip what was going on. So yeah, definitely good on that.
Yeah, the vibes have been restored. And when we talk about moving forward, obviously, like when we look at the Eagles win totals in totality, they've only won one game against a team currently with a winning record. Like, obviously circumstances are different. Like when they played the Saints were 2-0 and cooking and all this stuff. But right now, the only team we've beaten was the Packers, and that was on a neutral site out of the country. And that kind of set the stage for just the bumpy season. I crapped on the early season bye, but that was a reason. Jalen came out and said that was one of the most productive bye weeks of my career. And I think you saw him just steadily get better. And I think what this is showing me is that both sides of the ball are really starting to get the new system that is in play. You know, Jalen looks in complete control of this offense again, and like they were throwing right down the middle. They were throwing 10+ yards down the field consistently. It wasn't Jalen just trying to feed AJ or try to feed Devontae and make them do something special. He was creating special plays, and I think when you complement that with the ability that Saquon has, this team is officially balanced. Like, pick your poison, because this team can beat you in any way. And the Eagles had spots in the Bengals game where they had multiple like third and longs, and they were still able to convert. So Jalen is now looking like he's kind of back in control, and you're watching him. He handled more responsibility this year. It's the opposite of what we're seeing from the Niners and Brock, right? Like, they've let Jalen take full control of this offense, and he's adjusting every play at the line of scrimmage. He's making checkdowns. He's calling out what he sees, and he's responsible for it. And I thought even when they were up and down, he was doing a good job of that. And now that he's limiting the turnovers, he looks like a true efficient quarterback again. And that's exactly what this team needs with all the talent that we have to win moving forward. So moving forward, this division is still up for the taking. Washington is doing awesome, and they obviously got lucky with a Hail Mary. You can't really do anything about that. And they got the Giants this week, and so the Eagles need to take care of business. They got the Jaguars this week, and the Jaguars are going through their own nonsense. Like, they choked a game against the Packers last week after Jordan Love went out, and they're dealing with tons of injuries. Christian Kirk is now out for the season with a broken collarbone. That sucks. But Travis Etienne might be back. But their main guys, Brian Thomas Jr., Tank Bigsby, there's guys showing up on the injury report as questionable. So we have no idea what that means. They're probably going to play. But that means their guys are starting to get a little bit banged up. And they just traded their starting offensive tackle, their starting left tackle, and their best offensive lineman to the Minnesota Vikings. So now Trevor's blind spot is exposed and all. So this is another game where the Eagles should take care of business if we are the team that we think we are. And it's at home. We have 6 out of the next 10 games that we have are at home, because we played a lot on the road this year.
Wow.
So we have we're not going to be traveling that much. So we need to take advantage of this scheduling advantage that we have. So we have the next 2 games are the Jaguars and the Cowboys before the date with the Commanders, and the Commanders are the Giants and the Steelers. So hopefully the Steelers beat them up a little bit, even if they win or whatever. The Steelers beat them up a bit before we play them on Thursday night. That's going to be the true test of how good this Eagles team is on a primetime spot on Thursday night against Jaden Daniels and this Washington team that's kind of been putting it all together this year in a nice, awesome year, and they're a fun story. So I gotta respect it. So and I hope the team isn't looking ahead. I don't think they are. Nick Sirianni does a good job of keeping them in the now, but the vibes are heading in the right direction. This team seems like they're starting to figure everything out. So I'm really excited to see what this team looks like 2 weeks down the road. But when we focus on this week, they should beat this team. And I feel bad for Dougie P. He has to come back. He might get fired this week after playing Philly. Like, it might just be bad. But this team likes to run the ball. The Jaguars do, and they have two really good backs, especially if they get ETN back. So ETN and Bigsby, they're gonna try and just use them. And Jalen Carter showed up on the injury report. He's had a lingering shoulder issue, which worries me because statistically, it doesn't show up all the time what Jalen Carter brings. But if we lose him for this game, it might be a bigger hole than we anticipate. And obviously, Landon Dickerson showed up on the injury report today too. He's been dealing with a wrist issue, and he just didn't play. He didn't participate in practice. I don't know what his game status is, but they had Tyler Steen, who was operating on the right guard, practicing on the left guard. Now that Mekhi Becton's back from concussion, so we're having some moving parts here. But I'm confident, even with moving parts, even with some of these dudes missing, we should still beat this team because we are better than the Jaguars. That's just how it is right now.
I'm trying to remember in the last game against Cincy, Lane Johnson went down. He came back in, right?
Yeah, it was a quick stinger. Someone had landed on his ankle weird, and then he was up and walking around, and he just came right back, and he missed a play.
He's a full go then for this week.
So he's good.
Okay.
And in a couple of weeks, we'll get Jordan Mailata back potentially off of IR, and he's been dealing with the hamstring. So it's like we're going to get pieces that are going to come back, and we're looking good without them right now. Like we did. Yeah. Trey Hendrickson was a non-factor, and that was a huge surprise to me. So they found ways to block scheme. They've sent, Jack Stoller to Calcaterra to kind of help Fred Johnson on the edge, so Trey Hendrickson couldn't really make that big of an impact. So I like that, especially when you have Josh Allen Hines, however he changed his last name, and then Trayvon Walker on the Jacksonville side of things. That defensive line can cause issues if you're not careful. So I anticipate this to be a big Jalen game, a big passing offense game. They're going to try and get Saquon, but this Jags defense has actually been relatively decent against the run. So I'm sure we're going to set up some runs and then just blow it open with AJ and Devontae, and that's what I'm hoping for this week. I'm excited to see this defense, just like how it works against a team that's inferior again. So I'm hoping for if we're where I think we are and the vibes are what they are, I'm anticipating like a 27-14 victory at home against this Jaguars team that is they're kind of just waiting for the season to be over at this point now. Their season's kind of lost. I mean, the AFC South is in a weird spot with Houston. Everyone's dinged up. So, and the Indianapolis Colts, I mean, they're playing Joe Flacco. Anthony Richardson's too tired to play, apparently. So I don't know what the heck is going on over there. So in theory, if they win this game, if the Jags win this game, they're very much in the thick of it. So they still have a lot to play for. It's not over yet, but things are looking bleak. So they're a desperate team. And if we can respond like that against a desperate team, I'm going to feel really confident about it.
Yeah. And that's going to be key. I'll just wrap by my side of things by saying, first of all, I think the Eagles are going to win this one 24-14. Look, this version of the Eagles that I've seen the last 3 weeks is the version that I saw in 2022 that went all the way and came up just shy. I mean, just shy. And just getting back to that standard of football and that confidence level is going to be monumental moving forward for the rest of this year. Because you talk about that home court or that home field advantage that you have here for 6 of the last 8, right?
6 of the last 10, yeah.
6 of the last 10, excuse me. And that's huge. And you talk about just vibes being up. You have some matchups against some key, division rivals. You see the Cowboys, that's going to be an easy win. Commanders is just going to be a fun game. That's actually my highlighted game for the year at the moment, between our two teams, because I love the Commanders team right now. I really do.
They're
I think that they
cooking.
got super lucky last week, but I mean, Jaden Daniels, he's gonna be a baller. He is a baller right now. He's gonna be an MVP candidate at some point in his career.
Scares me, bro.
He's essentially Lamar Jackson right now, and he's only gonna get better. So I really like that team. I can only imagine what they would have looked like if they had traded for Brandon Ayuk. But no, that game is gonna be a really good like kind of a stack up
Yeah,
game. How do the Eagles stack up against the Commanders? Like, what does that look like, and vice versa? Because I think both teams are going to have that game highlighted. It's that division rival, right? But it's also two teams gunning for the top of the division. So you're out for each other's necks at that point. You're trying to get that win. You're trying to get the tiebreakers, right? And yeah, I'm just stoked. So if you can get the win in Jacksonville, keep this thing rolling, and just keep cooking, it's going to be hard to see any teams beating the Eagles right now.
Yeah, and I mean, we're set up pretty nicely. We have tough matchups coming up, but we also have good matchups where we're like, okay, we can beat these teams.
Exactly.
And Cowboys are going through it. Normally we split. I'm feeling good about it this year, how we can handle the Cowboys. So it'll be interesting to see just kind of what we do, but it starts here against Jacksonville, and it starts with just taking care of business against a team that you are easily way better than. So if they can come out and put up a good game at home, I'm excited to see what happens so we can prepare for Dallas. So with that being said, I think that's enough for the Eagles. I'm excited to win and hopefully get a good dub this week. So now that you get to rest, we'll move on over to our Chargers check-in. Last week we kind of glazed over them. They did lose on a game-winning field goal to the Cardinals, which was surprising. It was an interesting way to lose. But then they responded really well and won 26-8 against the lowly Saints at this point, who are going through season-ending injury as well after season-ending injury. And playing whoever they were at quarterback. I don't even think it was Radler last game. But this week, they have an interesting matchup against an all of a sudden, who would have thought without Deshaun Watson, frisky Browns team, and Jameis Winston, who actually just upset the Ravens last week. So it's of course that's just how it works. But how do you think this is going to be an interesting matchup? How do you feel? Do you think the Chargers are going to be able to pull this one off against a desperate Browns team that isn't completely out of it yet?
Last week for the Browns was that game moved mountains for that team in terms of a vibes perspective, because I mean, all season long they were just down bad. They couldn't figure out anything offensively. Defensively, the standard wasn't the same as last year. And so this team has just been kind of going through it. And for the Browns to get the win that they did last week in the way that they did, you know, they're taking a lot of momentum into this game against the Chargers. As far as keeping that style of play and that winning style of play, I haven't seen enough from that Browns team, you know, currently to really think that they can bring that same level of play. So I think the Chargers are going to have this one in the bag. I think the Chargers have just from a coaching standpoint and from an overall player standpoint have got a little bit more of an advantage going into this one. And as far as the lines are concerned, you know, with Myles Garrett, he's always going to be a problem. I mean,
Right.
it's simple as that. And this is the kind of game where you got to get the ball out quick. You got to get it concise, on point. And that's going to be the key for me for the Chargers in this one, because Myles is definitely going to be wreaking havoc. He's going to get pressures on Herbs. And if you're not drawing up the quick plays, it's going to be a tough one for that offense to find any rhythm whatsoever. So this is going to be the kind of game where Harbaugh really dips into what he's really good at, and that's game planning for a certain player or a certain scheme that he's being thrown at. He was really good at it for his entire career. So far this year, he's showed the same signs of, you know, not missing a beat when it comes to understanding these NFL players, these NFL schemes, everything that's been thrown at him. So from that perspective, I do have the Chargers winning this one. I think that they've got an upper hand in this one. I know they're in Cleveland. The only problem is I don't know what the weather is. I didn't check that. and that
Yeah.
could be a factor. I mean, we're coming up on the colder times of the year, but I think if it's a relatively clean game, the Chargers should have this one in the bag.
Yeah, and I think good call on the lad McConkey because he popped off last week too. So he's starting to find his
Yeah.
rhythm with Herbert and trying to become that number one weapon. I think this team could be so much better if they just had a true number one to pair with some of these guys and give Herbert another chance. I think that's a process that he's trying to get used to as well, not having the same level of talent when you don't have Keenan Allen and Mike Williams at their peak there. Um, but I agree, this team, like, again, it was always going to be expected with this young team, new coach. Like, Harbaugh was going to change the culture, but they still had pieces that needed addressing, and they didn't really get the chance to address it. And they're making do with what they have, and their defense is always solid, and they're looking good. So it's going to be a fun game for sure. And I would put this one, I think it's going to be kind of a nail biter. I would put it like 24-21 LA. Maybe even
That's
17-14, honestly.
that's interesting. I don't know that I have it so much of a nail biter because, like I said, I don't know if I have that much faith in the Browns yet. I might after this week if the Browns prove me wrong, but I'm going to go with my gut on this one. I think it's going to be similar to what I scored the Eagles game at. I'm going to say 24-14 Chargers.
I love that. All right. So we are now going to move on to our betting picks of the week. We have a combined one this time, like we did last week. We like this. We like these same games this week. So we're really excited to dish them out. So we're going to start with the Chicago Bears versus the Arizona Cardinals. I convinced Ben this week. The Cardinals are 1-point favorites against the Bears at home. The Cardinals came off of a really nice win against the Dolphins with Tua was back. Marvin Harrison Jr. got another 100-yard game, and the Bears, Caleb Williams threw for 120 yards, I think, last week. And I mean, they almost won that game because the defense is awesome. But I think the Cardinals are going to ride that offensive momentum. I think there's times where it feels like they figure things out and then they don't. But I think the Cardinals are going to win this one at home. Our next one here is that we got the Dallas Cowboys versus the Atlanta Falcons. Atlanta Falcons are 2.5-point favorites. That's not enough. The Atlanta Falcons are going to do away with this Cowboys team, I think, pretty easily. The Cowboys are just on a downward trajectory. And the Falcons have the recipe to beat this team. Kirk Cousins is going to dice them up. They have the running game that makes it work, and their defense is going to be good enough. They have AJ Terrell. They have guys who can slow down CD on that side. So when the Cowboys have been as one-dimensional as they have, it's going to be really hard to score against this Falcons team that defensively has a lot of different elements to it. So our final pick of the week is going to be the Washington Commanders against the New York Giants. Commanders are 3.5-point favorites. The Giants are in a tailspin. I hate to admit it because I don't want this result to happen, but this is too easy of a game not to pick and too low of a line. I'm surprised. So I know they played really close last time, and had the Giants had a kicker, it probably would have been a different game. But I think both of these teams are kind of different now than what they were when they met early in the year. And I think the Commanders are much more seasoned, and they're going to be ready to go for this one. All right, so those were our betting picks of the week. And that was pretty much it. Do you have any final thoughts, brother, before we head out here and you get to enjoy a week of just Kings, I guess is what I should say, because it's not a true bye because the Kings are here, but
No, and that's exactly it. I'm just going to enjoy the bye week for the Niners. I'll still watch football because football is football. I love it to death. But I get to lock in on the Kings for a week, and I'm really stoked to see what they can do.
Yeah, heck yeah, dude. All right. So with that being said, this was episode 63 of the Behind the Back podcast. You can hit us up on any one of our social medias that are listed up above. You can send us an email at behindthebackpod13@gmail.com or hit us up for you audio listeners. All of our links to descriptions are down below. Please like, comment, rate, review, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Help the show grow. We're loving everything that we get to do with you guys and all these fun conversations we get to have on a week-to-week basis. And honestly, it's good to be in the thick of it now that both seasons are going, and we really just get to hammer home on our teams. And hopefully, now that football is about to hit its peak, that we can get some playoff football from both of our teams here. So I'm Marcos Conan Negron. Beside me here, as always, is
Benny the Jet.
All right, y'all. We love y'all. We will talk to you next week. Peace.
Peace.